The diplomatic ship floated quietly in space near the alien station. Captain Derek Martinez stood on the bridge and watched the massive structure grow larger on the screen. His hands were steady, but his heart beat a little faster than usual. This was it. The first time humans would meet the Kelvari face to face. 3 months of careful messages back and forth had led to this moment. The Kelvari wanted to meet humans in person. They wanted to build trust and friendship between their two species. Derek had been chosen to lead this first meeting because of his calm nature and diplomatic skills. Dr. Paul Henderson stood next to the captain. The doctor held his electronic notebook tightly. He had studied everything available about Kelvari customs, but reading about aliens was very different from meeting them. Paul adjusted his uniform collar nervously. Amy Brooks worked at the communications station. She looked up with a smile. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls. The message came through clearly. The Kelvari were giving them permission to dock at the station. Derek nodded and gave the order. The ship began its approach. Within minutes, the docking was complete. Derek walked down the corridor with Paul and Sophie Grant, their cultural expert. Sophie had spent years studying alien societies. She knew how important this meeting was for humanity. The airlock door opened with a soft hiss. 3 tall beings stood on the other side. Their skin was smooth and seemed to glow softly with pale blue and green colors. They were beautiful in a strange way. Their large eyes blinked slowly as they looked at the humans. The lead Kelvari stepped forward. His movements were graceful and fluid. He extended a hand in the human greeting gesture they had learned from videos and messages. His name was Ambassador Thelen. Derek shook the offered hand. The Kelvari's skin felt cool and smooth like touching polished stone. Thelen's voice was gentle when he spoke. He welcomed them to the station and said it was an honor to host the first human visitors. The ambassador explained that they needed to do medical scans of all visitors. This was normal procedure for any new species visiting the station. It was for safety reasons. They needed to make sure there were no diseases that could harm either species. They also wanted to check if the air and environment were safe for humans. Paul stepped forward and introduced himself as the mission's doctor. He said he would be happy to work with their medical team. Thelen seemed pleased with this response. He gestured for them to follow him down the corridor. The medical facility was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. The walls glowed softly with their own light. The medical equipment looked like it had been grown rather than built. Everything had smooth curved edges instead of sharp corners. It was both alien and oddly peaceful. A Kelvari doctor named Syrinx greeted them. Her skin glowed with a soft purple color. She seemed friendly and professional. She explained that the scanning process would not hurt at all. It would take about 1 hour to complete for all 3 humans. Syrinx pointed to a circular platform in the center of the room. Strange crystal structures floated in the air around it. Derek went first. He stepped onto the platform and stood still. Warm light washed over his body from head to toe. The sensation was actually pleasant, like standing in gentle sunshine. When his scan finished, Paul and Sophie took their turns. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The process was quick and painless, just as Syrinx had promised. Derek started to relax. This was going well. Then something changed. Syrinx was looking at her holographic display screen. Her skin began to flicker rapidly between different colors. She leaned closer to the screen and zoomed in on something. Her large eyes grew even wider. She spoke softly, almost to herself. She said she was detecting unusual markings beneath the outer layer of Derek's skin. There was permanent coloring arranged in complex patterns. Her voice carried confusion and surprise. Derek felt confused for a moment. Then understanding hit him like a wave. She was talking about his tattoos. He had almost forgotten about them. They were just such a normal part of his body that he never thought about them anymore. Syrinx's skin flashed bright orange. This was a color the humans had not seen before. She quickly called for Ambassador Thelen and several other Kelvari. They came rushing into the medical bay and gathered around the display screen. Their movements showed agitation and concern. Thelen turned to face Derek. His skin had gone very pale, almost white. His voice was careful and slow when he spoke. He asked if Derek bore combat markings. He asked if Derek was a warrior. Derek was surprised by the question. He started to explain that no, he was a naval officer, but the tattoos were not military marks. They were just personal art. They were for decoration and personal meaning. but he could see the alarm growing on the Kelvari faces. Theln's skin stayed pale white. He asked if Derek had permanently marked his body with symbolic images. He gestured to Paul and Sophie. Their scans now appeared on screens next to Derek's. Paul had a tattoo on his shoulder. Sophie had one on her ankle. Sophie tried to explain in her calm, diplomatic voice. She said that tattoos were very common in human culture. Millions of humans had them. They were decorative or meant to remember important things. They did not mean anything about military rank or fighting experience. The Kelvari began speaking to each other in their own language. The sounds were clicks and whistles that the humans could not understand. Syrinx pulled up more detailed data from the scans. Her movements were quick and urgent. Syrinx pointed to the tribal design on Derek's arm. She said it looked like territorial markers that warrior species used. Then she highlighted the words tattooed on Paul's shoulder. She said they looked like coordinates, maybe from a battle location. Paul laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He tried to explain that it was just a quote from a book. The words said, "Not all who wander are lost." They were not coordinates to any place. They were just words that meant something to him personally, but the Kelvari were not calming down. Theln stepped away from the humans. His skin was cycling through rapid color changes. He said they needed to call an emergency council meeting right away. He said they had not been told that humanity sends warriors for peaceful meetings. Derek raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. He spoke clearly and calmly. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He asked them to please let the humans explain, but Theln was already moving toward the door. He said the humans would need to stay in the medical bay under observation. The council would meet and decide what to do next. His voice carried worry and distrust. As the Kelvari hurried out of the room, only one nervous guard remained. The three humans looked at each other with wide eyes. None of them had expected this. Paul broke the silence with a dry comment. He said this was possibly the worst first contact scenario he could have imagined. His voice carried dark humor. Derek pulled out his communicator. He knew he needed to contact Earth immediately. What should have been a simple, friendly cultural exchange had just become a potential crisis between species. All because of some ink under their skin, all because of tattoos that they had gotten years ago without thinking they would ever cause an interstellar incident. Derek looked down at the eagle tattoo on his forearm. He had gotten it after graduating from the academy. It represented freedom and achievement to him. But now he understood that the Kelvari saw something completely different. They saw a predator with claws extended. They saw a warrior's mark. The situation was serious, and Derek had no idea how to fix it. The hours passed slowly in the medical bay. Derek paced back and forth while nervous Kelvari guards watched from near the door. Their skin colors kept changing between pale yellow and gray, showing their anxiety. The humans could do nothing but wait. Derek used his communicator to contact Earth. Commander Lisa Chen appeared on the small screen. Her office back on Earth was just starting its morning. When Derek finished explaining what had happened, Lisa rubbed her temples and looked exhausted. She spoke slowly, making sure she understood correctly. The Kelvari thought the human delegation were elite warriors because they had tattoos. Her voice carried disbelief. Sophie added more information. She explained that based on what Thelon had said, the Kelvari believed tattoos indicated some kind of permanent military class, like humans were branded for combat from birth or from joining the military. Paul had been studying his electronic notebook. He had been reading through their xenoanthropology database, looking for any information that might help. He said it actually made sense from the Kelvari perspective. The Kelvari and most other species in the consortium had perfectly uniform skin. Any permanent marking would have to be deliberately applied. It would have to mean something very important. Lisa asked if they could prove the tattoos were just cosmetic. Could they show that tattoos meant nothing special? Derek shook his head. He asked how anyone could prove something was meaningless. That was exactly the problem. To the Kelvari, deliberately scarring your own body was such an extreme action that it had to indicate extreme status or extreme purpose. The door opened and Ambassador Thelon entered with two other Kelvari officials. His skin had settled into a deep purple color. The humans had learned this meant serious concern or worry. Thelon's voice was formal and careful when he spoke. He said the council had reviewed all the scan data. They had consulted their databases about warrior cultures from other species. They had significant concerns about humanity. Derek stood up straight. He tried to speak to explain, but Theln raised a hand to stop him. The ambassador asked if Derek denied that he had permanently altered his body. Derek said no, he did not deny it, but he tried to add more explanation. Theln cut him off again. Theln asked if these alterations included symbolic images, text, and mathematical patterns. Derek tried to say they were not mathematical, but again Theln interrupted. The ambassador pulled up a hologram that showed Paul's compass rose tattoo in detail. The hologram displayed calculations showing the precise geometric ratios in the design. Theln also pointed out that Derek's tattoo included a predatory bird with extended claws. His voice made it clear that he saw this as evidence of warrior status. Derek looked down at his forearm where an eagle spread its wings. He had gotten this tattoo after graduating from the Naval Academy. To him, it symbolized freedom and achievement. But now he saw it through Kelvari eyes. To them, it was a hunter with claws ready to kill. Sophie stepped forward. Her diplomatic training took over. She asked Ambassador Theln about Kelvari body modification. Did his people ever alter their appearance in any way? Theln's skin flickered with confusion. He explained that Kelvari had special cells in their skin that changed color automatically based on emotions and environment. They did not control these color changes artificially. Sophie asked a hypothetical question. If a Kelvari wanted to change their appearance just for beauty, would that be allowed? Theln seemed puzzled by the question. He said there would be no reason to do such a thing. One's body was sufficient as it was. To alter it would suggest dissatisfaction with one's genetic inheritance. He searched for the right word and finally said it would be illogical. Sophie spoke gently. She said this was the cultural gap between their species. Humans did not see tattoos as suggesting dissatisfaction. They saw them as enhancement, as art, as memory made physical. One of the other Kelvari officials spoke. Her name was Counselor Vrex. Her skin was deep orange, showing skepticism. She said the humans claimed these markings were random, yet each human chose different symbols. She pointed out that Derek had a predator. Paul had navigational tools. Sophie's ankle displayed red flowering vines. She explained that in nature, red often signaled poison or warning. Sophie looked down at her rose tattoo. It was a memorial to her grandmother who had loved gardening. She explained that it was just a flower. Her grandmother used to grow them. Vrex's skin flashed bright white with shock. She asked if Sophie commemorated her ancestors through permanent body modification. She said that only the most honored warriors in known cultures earned the right to carry their family lineage visibly on their bodies. Derek felt the situation getting worse. Every explanation seemed to make the Kelvari more concerned instead of less. On the communicator screen, he could see Lisa talking frantically with other officials back on Earth. Paul suddenly stood up. He said he wanted to propose an experiment. His voice was calm and scientific. Theln turned to look at him. He asked what kind of experiment Paul meant. Paul suggested they scan the rest of the crew from the ship. He explained that their ship had 43 people total. If the Kelvari theory was correct, and tattoos indicated warrior status, then only a select few crew members would have them. Maybe only Special Forces soldiers or elite fighters. Derek understood immediately what Paul was suggesting. He added to the explanation. But if tattoos were just common cultural practice, the Kelvari would find them spread randomly across the crew. Engineers would have them. Technicians would have them. Cooks would have them. People with no combat training whatsoever would have tattoos. Theln considered this proposal. His skin shifted to a thoughtful blue-green color. He said the logic was sound. He agreed to scan the entire crew. Over the next several hours, the Kelvari medical team scanned every human on the ship. Derek watched through an observation window as his crew members walked through the scanning area one by one. Many of them looked confused about why they needed sudden medical scans. When all the scans were complete, Cyrix compiled the results. She presented them to the council with Derek and his team watching. The holographic display showed clear data. 26 out of 43 crew members had tattoos. The ship's head chef, Nick Palmer, had full-sleeve tattoos covering both arms. Lieutenant Karen White was a communications officer with no combat duties. She had an elaborate tattoo covering her entire back. Even Gregory Stone had a tattoo. He was a 60-year-old civilian botanist. He had a small anchor on his shoulder from when he was young. Derek gestured to the data display. He said the Kelvari could see there was no connection between tattoos and military rank. There was no connection to combat specialization. It was just personal choice. But Vrex was studying the data very carefully. She spoke slowly. She said the humans were telling them that over half of their species voluntarily underwent permanent body modification for no functional purpose. Her voice carried both confusion and concern. Sophie clarified the numbers. She said not half of all humans had tattoos, but yes, perhaps 30 to 40% of humans in some cultures had at least one tattoo. The Kelvari fell completely silent. Their skin colors became muted as they processed this information. Finally, Theln spoke. His voice was serious. He said the Kelvari Consortium existed for a specific reason. Their species had learned through hard experience that some races were naturally violent. They had developed protocols for identifying warrior cultures before those cultures could threaten peaceful species. Derek felt cold fear run through him. He understood what Theln was implying. The Kelvari thought humanity was a warrior culture. Theln chose his words carefully. He said they believed a species where nearly half the population voluntarily underwent painful permanent body modification for purely aesthetic reasons was either incredibly resilient or dangerously comfortable with suffering. Both possibilities concerned them greatly. Derek looked at his crew displayed on the screens. He tried to see them as the Kelvari saw them. Nick Palmer with his culinary school graduation date tattooed on his chest. Karen White with her daughter's name written in script along her ribs. Gregory Stone with his memorial to his late wife. Each tattoo told a story of human endurance, sentiment, and the need to carry meaning on their very skin. Derek spoke quietly. He said the Kelvari were right. Humans were comfortable with pain, but not because they were warriors. It was because they were survivors. Because they were sentimental, because they believed some things mattered enough to carry them forever, even if carrying them hurt. Theln's skin shifted to a color the humans had never seen before. It was a deep indigo that seemed to glow from within. The ambassador spoke slowly. He said perhaps the Kelvari needed to learn much more about humanity before they could truly understand them. Derek felt a small spark of hope. The conversation was not over. The Kelvari had not rejected them completely. There was still a chance to build understanding between their two species, but it would require more explanation, more patience, and more honesty than Derek had expected. The Consortium Council chamber was enormous. Representatives from 7 different alien species filled the circular room. Derek stood in the center, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching him. Some had multiple eyes. Some had eye structures he could not even identify. All of them were focused on him. The council had convened in full session for the first time in 3 cycles. This was their version of years. It showed how serious they considered the human situation. Derek had been given one chance to explain human culture before they voted. They would either continue diplomatic relations or classify humanity as a potential threat. Ambassador Theln had spent the entire previous day preparing Derek for this moment. The Kelvari diplomat had proven more open-minded than many of his colleagues. But even Theln struggled to understand why humans would voluntarily mark their bodies permanently. High Counselor Zephix called the meeting to order. Zephix was a tall, crystalline being. When Zephix spoke, the voice sounded like wind chimes. It was beautiful and strange. Zephix announced that the council would now hear from Captain Derek Martinez of Earth. Derek took a deep breath. He glanced at the notes Sophie had prepared for him. They had decided to approach this not as a defense, but as an educational presentation. They would teach the council about human culture. Derek began speaking. He addressed them respectfully as honored counselors. He said he stood before them as proof of a misunderstanding, but also as an opportunity. His species practiced body modification, specifically tattooing, for reasons that had nothing to do with warfare or violence. He wanted to help them understand by sharing real stories. Holographic displays activated around the chamber. Images appeared showing different crew members who had volunteered to share their personal stories. The first image showed Lieutenant Brandon Cole. He was a young man with a compass tattoo on his forearm. Derek explained that the compass had belonged to Brandon's grandfather. His grandfather had used it during Earth's maritime era, when humans still navigated oceans using magnetic compasses. When Brandon's grandfather passed away, Brandon got this tattoo to feel connected to him. It reminded Brandon of all the stories his grandfather had told about navigation and exploration. Zephix's crystalline structure refracted light in patterns. Derek had learned this indicated attention and interest. Zephyx asked if this was a memorial practice. Derek confirmed it was memorial, but explained it was more than that. It was about connection. Humans had limited lifespans compared to many species in the Council. Humans lived perhaps 80 or 90 years if they were fortunate. They used tattoos to hold on to people and moments they did not want to forget. Another image appeared. This one showed Nicole Rivers, the ship's engineer. She had a detailed mechanical gear system tattooed up her entire arm. Derek explained that Nicole got this tattoo when she completed her engineering doctorate. Each gear represented a different field of study she had mastered. It was a celebration of achievement, not a rank insignia or military marker. A Kelvari counselor named Drek spoke up. His skin flickered orange with skepticism. He asked if the pain involved in these markings was significant. Their medical scans had shown repeated trauma to the skin layers. Derek admitted that yes, getting a tattoo did hurt, but he explained that humans had a complex relationship with pain. Humans ran marathons that damaged their muscles. They climbed mountains that could kill them. They pushed themselves because the achievement and the experience meant something beyond the temporary discomfort. Paul stepped forward and asked permission to add something. Derek nodded and Paul addressed the council directly. Paul introduced himself as a physician. He had studied pain extensively throughout his medical career. He explained that for humans, pain was not just a warning system. It was also a teacher. The pain of getting a tattoo was temporary, but it made the result more meaningful. Humans valued things they worked for, things they endured for. It was part of human psychology. A counselor from the Dreth species leaned forward. The Dreth were beings covered in natural armor plating. The counselor said that humans seemed almost masochistic, seeking pain deliberately. Sophie joined Derek and Paul. She offered a different perspective. She said humans could also be described as determined. She asked the council to consider that humans evolved on a challenging world. Earth had weather extremes. It had predators. It had diseases. Humans survived not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being stubborn, by enduring. Tattoos were just one expression of that fundamental trait. Sophie activated another image showing her rose tattoo. She told the council about her grandmother, who had taught her about botany by showing her a garden. When her grandmother died, Sophie got this rose to remember those lessons. Every time Sophie looked at the tattoo, she remembered her grandmother teaching her about patience because roses take time to bloom, about resilience because roses survive harsh winters, about beauty because her grandmother found beauty everywhere. The chamber fell quiet. Derek could see the counselors processing this information. Their various biological indicators showed confusion, concern, and in some cases, curiosity. Zephyx finally spoke. The crystalline being asked for clarification. Humans inflicted pain upon themselves to remember, to celebrate, and to connect with others. The question sought confirmation. Derek confirmed this was correct. Zephyx asked if this was considered normal in human culture. Derek said it was common. He explained that normal varied by region and community, but yes, tattoos were generally accepted. Counselor Vrex spoke up. She was the Kelvari who had been most opposed to humans from the beginning. She said they had analyzed Earth's history through the data humans had provided. She pointed out that humanity had engaged in countless wars. Earth still had active conflicts happening. She asked how humans could claim these markings were not related to their violent nature. Derek had expected this challenge. He had prepared for it. He told the council honestly that humans did not claim they were not violent. Humans could be violent. They had fought wars. They had committed terrible acts. They struggled with their own aggressive instincts. But they had also created art, music, and literature. They had built societies based on cooperation. Humans were complex, just like any species. He gestured to his eagle tattoo. He explained that this bird was indeed a predator. But in his culture, the eagle also represented freedom, the ability to soar above conflict, the vision to see beyond immediate threats. Humans were capable of violence, but they were also capable of choosing peace. Lisa Chen's voice came through the communicator from Earth. She announced they were transmitting additional data to the council. New displays activated around the chamber, showing statistics that the diplomatic team had compiled overnight. Lisa explained that these studies showed correlation data between tattooed populations and various social metrics. The data clearly showed that humans with tattoos were no more likely to engage in violence than those without tattoos. In fact, in some cultures, heavily tattooed individuals were artists, spiritual leaders, and community organizers. The correlation the Kelvari feared simply did not exist in reality. Suddenly, Gregory Stone stood up in the observation gallery. He asked if he could say something. His voice carried through the chamber. Derek looked up in surprise. Gregory had been quiet throughout the entire crisis. He had kept to his botanical laboratory. But now the elderly man walked slowly down to the chamber floor. His movements showed his age, but he moved with clear purpose. Gregory told the council he was not military. He was a scientist who studied plants. He had never fired a weapon in his entire life. But he had a tattoo. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the small anchor on his shoulder. He explained he got this tattoo 62 years ago when he was 17 years old. He had been stupid and impulsive, and he thought it looked cool. Some of the counselors made sounds that might have been alien laughter. The tension in the room decreased slightly. Gregory continued speaking. He said he had never regretted the tattoo. Every time he saw it, he remembered being young. He remembered feeling brave enough to do something permanent. Now, as an old man, it reminded him that he was still the same person he had been back then, even though everything else had changed. He explained that this was what tattoos did for humans. They were anchors, he said, smiling at the word. They kept humans connected to themselves across time. Derek watched the mood in the chamber shift. The counselors began conferring among themselves. Their various biological markers showed less alarm and more contemplation. Some showed what might be understanding. Thelen stood up. His skin had calmed to a peaceful blue color. He said the Kelvari delegation requested a recess to consult with their fellow counselors. Zephix granted the recess immediately. The humans were escorted to an adjacent waiting chamber. Derek felt the tension draining from his shoulders. The presentation had gone well. Whether it would be enough, they would know soon. Sophie spoke quietly, telling everyone they had done well. Paul shook his head in amazement. He commented that they had just given an alien civilization a lecture on why humans got tattoos. It seemed surreal, Derek corrected him gently. They had given the council context. Whether that context was enough, they would discover soon. Gregory sat down heavily. He looked exhausted but satisfied. He told, 3 weeks passed after the council's decision. The human ship remained docked at Kelvar Prime Station while cultural exchange programs were being established. Derek and his crew had become something unexpected. They were celebrities among the station's diverse alien population. The problem was they had become famous specifically because of their tattoos. Sophie rushed into Derek's quarters one morning holding her electronic tablet. Her expression showed urgent concern. She told Derek he needed to see something immediately. On the screen, a news broadcast from one of the consortium's public networks was playing. The title read, "The Marked Ones Understanding Humanity's Pain Rituals." Derek felt his stomach sink. He asked if the broadcast really called tattoos pain rituals. Sophie confirmed it did and said the situation got worse. She scrolled through several more broadcasts. There was an entire movement among young Kelvari who had become fascinated by human body modification. Ambassador Thelen was extremely concerned about this development. Thelen had requested an emergency meeting. Within an hour, Derek found himself in a conference room with half a dozen agitated Kelvari officials. Their skin colors flickered rapidly, showing their emotional distress. Thelen began speaking immediately. His skin was shifting rapidly between different colors. He told Derek they had a serious situation. Since Derek's testimony to the council, 47 young Kelvari had requested information about human tattooing procedures. 3 had already traveled to Earth specifically to visit tattoo establishments. Derek was genuinely surprised. This was completely unexpected. Counselor Vrex spoke sharply. Her voice carried frustration. She said this was worse than unexpected. It was unprecedented in Kelvari history. The Kelvari had never pursued permanent body modification before. She called this cultural contamination. Paul leaned forward. He spoke respectfully but challenged Vrex's assertion. He asked if cultural exchange was not supposed to involve some level of mutual influence between species. Vrex responded that exchange was acceptable, but wholesale adoption of alien practices was not. She pulled up a hologram. It showed a young Kelvari with what appeared to be a small symbol marked on their arm. The ink glowed against their natural bioluminescent skin. Vrex explained this was Zira, a university student. She had convinced a human artist to apply a permanent mark using methods adapted for Kelvari physiology. Zira claimed it represented her journey of self-discovery. Her parents were horrified by her choice. Sophie studied the image carefully. She commented that it was actually quite beautiful. The way the ink interacted with Kelvari bioluminescence created a stunning visual effect. Theln said flatly that beauty was not the point. The point was they had not anticipated this response. They thought understanding human tattoos would resolve their concerns about warrior culture. Instead, it had inspired imitation among their youth. Derek thought carefully before responding. He spoke respectfully but firmly. He told the ambassador that they could not control how people reacted to new ideas. If young Kelvari were interested in tattoos, that was ultimately their choice. Theln explained that Kelvari valued collective harmony above individual expression. Individual choices that significantly deviated from cultural norms caused social disruption in their society. Sophie argued that cultures evolved over time. Every species in the consortium had presumably changed throughout their history. They had adopted new technologies and new ideas. A new voice entered the conversation unexpectedly. An elderly Kelvari appeared in the doorway. The elder's skin displayed deep, rich purples and blues that seemed to shift like the night sky. Theln immediately stood, showing deep respect. He addressed the newcomer as Elder Mission. Elder Mission spoke with dry humor. The elder said clearly they had not expected this visit, or they would not be having this meeting without including the elder perspective. Mission's large eyes focused on Derek with intense curiosity. The elder asked if Derek was the tattooed captain everyone was discussing. Derek confirmed he was. Mission moved closer, studying Derek with fascination. The elder asked to see Derek's markings directly. Derek glanced at Thelon, who nodded permission. Derek rolled up his sleeves, revealing the eagle on his forearm and the tribal pattern on his bicep. Mission examined them closely. The elder even reached out to touch the skin with a gentle, cool finger. Mission murmured that it was fascinating. Derek carried images on his body that mattered to him. Stories and memories made visible. Derek confirmed this was correct. Mission's skin shifted to a warm gold color. The elder observed that Kelvari carried their stories in historical archives and oral traditions. But humans wore their stories on their bodies. There was beauty in that approach, vulnerability too. Humans could not hide what mattered to them. Derek admitted he had never thought of it that way before. Mission turned to address the other Kelvari in the room. The elder suggested that perhaps their young people were responding to something the Kelvari had lost over time. The Kelvari had become so focused on collective harmony that they had forgotten individual expression. These tattoos disturbed the officials because they represented something the Kelvari had suppressed. The desire to be seen as unique individuals, Rex protested. She insisted that Kelvari cultural cohesion was their greatest strength. Mishan countered that it might also be their greatest weakness. The elder asked how they could truly understand the diverse species of the consortium if they could not even accept diversity among themselves. The room fell completely silent. Derek could see internal struggle on every Kelvari face. Their skin colors betrayed their conflicted emotions with constant shifts and changes. Brandon Cole's voice suddenly came through Derek's communicator. He told the captain to come to Observation Deck 3 immediately. There was something Derek needed to see right away. Derek excused himself from the meeting. Sophie and Paul came with him. When they arrived at the observation deck, they found it crowded with both humans and various aliens. Everyone was staring out at the docking bay through the large windows. A small transport ship had just arrived. As they watched, its passengers began disembarking. Derek saw a group of young aliens from at least 5 different species. Several of them had visible marks on their skin or protective outer layers. Sophie asked what they were looking at. She could not quite understand what was happening. Nicole Rivers had been watching the arrivals. She turned to them with wide eyes. She explained these were cultural exchange students. They had all come to the station because they heard about human tattoos. They wanted to learn more. Some of them had already gotten markings on their homeworlds before even arriving. One of the new arrivals was a Dreth. Normally their armor plating was completely uniform, but this individual had a delicate pattern etched into their shoulder plate. A feathered alien from a species called the Avix, had dyed colorful patterns into their crest feathers. Even a young Kelvari bore a small glowing mark on their arm. Paul breathed that it was incredible. They had accidentally started an interspecies body modification movement. Nicole added the word accidentally with emphasis. She said they had accidentally revolutionized consortium culture. Sophie looked at her new ambassadorial credentials on her tablet. She mused that she was not sure anything that happened here was truly accidental. Maybe it was inevitable. When two cultures met honestly, change was always the result. Theln arrived on the observation deck. He saw the gathering of marked youth. His skin went through a rapid cascade of different colors showing shock and confusion. Elder Mission appeared beside the ambassador. The elder placed a calming hand on Thelon's arm. Mission asked Thelon if he could see what was happening. The young ones were not abandoning their cultures. They were finding new ways to express their connection to their heritage. One of the young Kelvari approached their group. It was Zira, the same individual from the earlier images. Her mark glowed softly against her cyan skin. It was a simple spiral pattern that pulsed gently with her natural bioluminescence. Zira spoke respectfully to Ambassador Theln. She said she knew this concerned him greatly, but she wanted him to understand why she had made this choice. She touched the mark gently. She explained she got it after completing her first deep space journey. It represented her path forward, always moving and always growing. Just like humans use tattoos to remember important moments, she wanted to carry this achievement with her always. Thelon studied her carefully. His skin was gradually calming to a steady blue. He asked if she was trying to become human. Zira answered firmly that no, she was not trying to become human. She was trying to find a new way to be Kelvari. The humans had taught them that marking your body could be an act of memory and meaning, not violence. She asked why Kelvari could not adapt that idea to their own culture. More of the marked youth gathered around. Each one explained their personal choices and reasons. The Dreth had marked themselves after saving their sibling's life. The Aviks had dyed their crest to honor their mentor. Every story was personal and meaningful. None had anything to do with warfare or aggression. Elder Mission turned to Derek. The expression might have been a smile. The elder said Derek had brought them an unexpected gift, not just an explanation of human culture, but a mirror for examining their own. These young people were not abandoning their heritage. They were expanding it. The days following the arrival of marked youth changed everything at Kelvar Prime Station. The consortium moved quickly to establish the first interspecies symposium on body modification and cultural expression. What had started as a diplomatic crisis had transformed into an unprecedented cultural exchange. Derek watched as the central plaza of the station filled with booths and displays. Humans shared their tattoo traditions, but they also brought information about other body modification practices. They showed examples of scarification, piercings, and even temporary body art like henna designs from various Earth cultures. Other species contributed their own cultural perspectives. The Dreth set up displays explaining their ceremonial armor modifications. In their culture, certain achievements earned the right to etch specific patterns into armor plating. The Aviks demonstrated their complex feather-dyeing rituals. They explained that different color combinations indicated different family lineages and accomplishments. Even the crystalline species, who Derek had thought could never participate, demonstrated something fascinating. They showed how they could etch patterns into their structure. These patterns would refract light in personally meaningful ways. The etchings were permanent and told stories through light and color. Nick Palmer became unexpectedly popular at the symposium. The ship's chef found himself surrounded by curious young Kelvari almost every day. They wanted to understand his full-sleeve tattoos. Nick patiently explained that each section of his tattoo told the story of his culinary journey through different Earth cultures. He showed them the Italian pasta and grapes on his left forearm, representing the year he studied in Rome. The Japanese cherry blossoms on his right arm marked his time learning traditional cooking in Kyoto. The French bread and wine near his elbow commemorated his training at a famous Paris culinary school. Each image connected to a place, a time, and lessons learned. The young Kelvari artists began sketching their own designs. They wanted to create tattoos that would work with their bioluminescent skin. The combination of human tattoo ink and Kelvari biology created stunning effects. The marks would glow and pulse with their natural color changes. Paul found himself giving lectures on the medical aspects of tattooing for different physiologies. Each species had unique considerations. Kelvari skin healed differently than human skin. Dreth armor required completely different tools and techniques. The Avics needed special dyes that would not damage their delicate feathers. Sophie worked with diplomatic teams from each species. They developed guidelines for responsible cultural exchange. The goal was to allow individuals to explore body modification while respecting the concerns of more traditional community members. One afternoon, Derek visited the new cultural center that had been established near the docking bays. Inside, he found a remarkable sight. A Kelvari artist named Syrinx was carefully applying a design to a young human volunteer. Syrinx had originally been a medical technician. Now she had retrained as a tattoo artist specializing in hybrid designs. The human volunteer was Marcus Bell. He was part of the new wave of cultural exchange students from Earth. Marcus was getting a design that incorporated both human and Kelvari symbolism. The tattoo would be unique, representing the bridge between two cultures. A young Kelvari observer watched the process with nervous curiosity. Their skin flickered between colors rapidly. They asked Marcus if it hurt. Marcus grinned despite the discomfort. He admitted it hurt a bit, but he explained that was part of the meaning. He was getting this tattoo to commemorate his time at the station, learning about Kelvari culture. The temporary discomfort was nothing compared to the permanent reminder that he had been brave enough to leave Earth and make alien friends. The young Kelvari's skin shifted to an understanding blue color. They asked if the pain was a teacher, repeating the words Paul had used in his council testimony. Marcus confirmed that was exactly right. Humans learned from discomfort. It made achievements more meaningful. Derek watched as Syrinx finished the tattoo. It was beautiful, blending Kelvari spiral patterns with human geometric designs. When Marcus looked at it in the mirror, his face showed pure joy. Marcus said it was perfect. He would carry this forever. His voice was full of emotion. Syrinx gestured to her own arm. She had marked herself with a small earth symbol. She said they all carried each other now, in a way. Humans and Kelvari and all the species who had chosen to mark themselves. They were connected by their choices, their courage, and their willingness to change. That evening, Derek gathered his senior crew in the observation lounge. They sat together looking out at Kelvar Prime and the stars beyond. It was one of their last nights at the station. Tomorrow they would begin preparations to return to Earth. Paul raised a glass in a toast. He said they had come to explain why humans had tattoos. He thought the mission was definitely accomplished. Nicole corrected him with a laugh. She said the mission was exceeded. They had accidentally revolutionized consortium culture. Sophie looked at her ambassadorial credentials on her tablet. She mused about the word accidentally. She was not sure anything that happened was truly accidental. Maybe it was inevitable. When two cultures met honestly, change was always the result. Gregory raised his own glass. The old anchor tattoo on his shoulder was visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. He proposed a toast to change, and to the courage to mark themselves with their choices. Everyone echoed the toast. They drank together, celebrating what they had accomplished. Derek looked around at his crew, at the station beyond the windows, at the stars that held so many worlds. Those worlds were now connected not just by politics or trade agreements. They were connected by shared symbols of meaning and memory. They had come to explain that humans were not warriors marked for battle. Instead, they had shown the galaxy that humans were artists, storytellers, and sentimentalists. Humans carried their stories on their very skin, and somehow that truth had been even more powerful than any warrior reputation could have been. The next morning, as final preparations began for departure, Derek received a message from Ambassador Thelen. The ambassador wanted to speak with Derek privately before the ship left. They met in a quiet garden area of the station. Real plants from various worlds grew in carefully controlled environments. It was peaceful and beautiful. Thelen's skin showed calm blue and green colors. Thelen thanked Derek personally for everything. He said Derek and his crew had changed the Kelvari. They had changed all the consortium species. They had been so afraid of human markings at first. In that fear, they had forgotten how to grow as a culture. Derek had reminded them that carrying meaning on your skin was not a sign of violence. It was a sign of valor in a different sense. The valor to declare publicly what mattered to you. Derek touched the eagle tattoo on his forearm. He thanked Theln for being willing to learn, for being willing to change his mind, for being willing to mark himself with that learning. Derek had noticed the tiny dot on Theln's hand that now glowed softly. Theln looked at his own mark. He said humans had taught them something important. They marked each other through their interactions. Derek had marked the Kelvari with his presence, his culture, his story. Now the Kelvari marked Derek in return, not on his skin but in their history. Humanity would always be remembered as the species that taught the consortium to embrace individual expression while honoring collective heritage. Derek felt emotion tighten his throat. He thanked Theln sincerely. As Derek walked back to his ship, he thought about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, a simple medical scan had identified his tattoos as warrior symbols. That misunderstanding had nearly caused an interstellar incident. But instead, it had become the foundation for something remarkable. He passed by the cultural center one last time. Through the windows, he could see humans and aliens working together. They were sharing techniques, discussing meanings, and creating new forms of expression that honored multiple cultures simultaneously. A group of young Kelvari artists waved to him. Their arms bore various glowing marks, each one unique and personal. Derek waved back, smiling. On the bridge of his ship, Derek gave the order to prepare for departure. The crew moved efficiently through their tasks. They were ready to go home, but they would carry memories of this place forever. Amy Brooks reported that all systems were ready. The docking clamps released with a soft clunk. The ship began to pull away from the station slowly and carefully. Derek stood at the view screen watching Kelvar Prime grow smaller. His communicator chimed with one final message from Theln. The ambassador's words were simple but profound. Theln said that in the end, the most dangerous weapon a species could carry was not marked on their skin. It was held in their hearts. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to change, the courage to grow. That was what made humans remarkable. Derek looked down at his tattoos. The eagle still spread its wings across his forearm. The tribal pattern still curved around his bicep. But now when he looked at them, he saw them through Kelvari eyes as well as human eyes. He saw symbols of memory and meaning. He saw declarations of what mattered. He saw the courage to be permanently changed by choices and experiences. The ship turned, orienting toward Earth. The stars stretched out before them, full of possibilities. Derek had come to this station. 6 months had passed since Derek and his crew returned to Earth. The planet felt both familiar and strange after their time in space. Derek had been promoted to admiral, and now oversaw the entire cultural exchange program with the consortium. His office overlooked the ocean, and he often found himself staring at the waves while thinking about how much had changed. Reports came in daily from Sophie at Kelvar Prime. The cultural movement they had accidentally started continued to grow. Over 200,000 beings across consortium space had now adopted some form of body modification. Each species had developed their own unique traditions that honored their heritage while embracing individual expression. The Kelvari had established schools teaching the art and philosophy of body marking. Young Kelvari studied not just technique, but the deeper meanings behind symbols and patterns. They learned their own history through this new lens, discovering stories of individual achievement that had been hidden in their focus on collective harmony. The Dreth had created an entire new social category. Those who bore modified armor were called the Marked Ones. They formed communities dedicated to both personal expression and traditional Dreth values of protection and service. The markings on their armor told stories of lives saved, battles won not through violence but through courage and sacrifice. The Avics had perhaps made the most dramatic cultural shift. Their feather dyeing practices had always existed, but they had been strictly controlled by tradition and family lines. Now young Avics dyed their crests in patterns that represented their own dreams and achievements, not just their family history. It caused tension with older generations, but it also sparked conversations about identity and tradition that were long overdue. Derek's communicator showed an incoming call from Sophie. He accepted it immediately. Her face appeared on the screen and she looked excited. Sophie told Derek she had incredible news. The Consortium Council had voted to establish a new holiday. They were calling it Unity Day. It would commemorate the moment when humans taught them that differences could be celebrated rather than feared. The first Unity Day celebration would happen in 3 weeks at Kelvar Prime, and the council had officially invited Derek and his entire original crew to attend. Derek felt a mix of pride and humility. He asked Sophie if the council really wanted them there. He worried they might be seen as causing too much change too quickly. Sophie laughed. She assured Derek that he had no idea how much he was loved across consortium space. She told him to check the latest cultural survey data she had just sent. Derek opened the file while they talked. The data showed something remarkable. Species that had embraced body modification reported increased satisfaction with their lives. They reported feeling more connected to their communities, not less. The act of choosing what to mark on their bodies had made people think deeply about what mattered to them. That reflection had strengthened cultural bonds rather than weakening them. There were problems, of course. Some conservative communities had banned body modification entirely. A few species had seen generational conflicts between marked youth and traditional elders. But overall, the data showed positive trends. Crime rates had not increased. Social cohesion had not decreased. The fears that had driven the initial suspicion of humans had proven unfounded. Derek agreed to bring his crew to Unity Day. He said they would be honored to attend. Over the next 3 weeks, Derek contacted his former crew members. Paul had returned to practicing medicine, but had also written a book about the psychology of body modification across species. It had become required reading in xenoanthropology courses across human universities. Nicole was working on new engine designs but was eager to return to Kelvar Prime. Brandon had been promoted to lieutenant commander and was training new diplomats. Karen had taken a teaching position, sharing her communications expertise with younger officers. Even Gregory, now 80 years old, insisted on making the journey despite his age. Nick Palmer had perhaps changed the most. The chef had become somewhat famous on Earth. His cookbook featuring recipes from different human cultures, each chapter marked by photos of his corresponding tattoos, had become a bestseller. He had used the profits to open a restaurant that employed both humans and aliens, creating fusion cuisine that blended multiple cultural traditions. The journey back to Kelvar Prime felt different this time. They traveled not as uncertain diplomats but as honored guests. When their ship docked, they found a welcoming committee that included Ambassador Theln, Elder Mycian, Counselor Vrex, and dozens of marked youth from various species. Thelon's skin glowed with warm, welcome colors. He had more marks now. Derek noticed a small spiral on his other hand, and what looked like a constellation pattern on his forearm. Thelon saw Derek looking and explained proudly that each mark represented a significant cultural bridge he had helped build between species. Elder Mycian looked no older despite the months that had passed. The elder embraced Derek in a gesture that the Kelvari had learned from humans. Mycian whispered that Derek had given them the greatest gift possible, the courage to evolve. Rex approached more hesitantly. Her skin showed colors of respect and mild embarrassment. She told Derek she owed him an apology. She had been so certain that humans were dangerous because of their tattoos. She had been so wrong. Now she wore several marks of her own, including one that represented her ability to change her mind when presented with new evidence. Derek assured her that no apology was necessary. Fear of the unknown was natural. What mattered was the willingness to learn and grow. The Unity Day celebration was beyond anything Derek had imagined. The central plaza of Kelvar Prime had been transformed. Holographic displays showed the history of body modification across dozens of species. Art installations featured works created by beings from multiple worlds, each piece exploring themes of identity, memory, and cultural evolution. There were demonstrations of various marking techniques. Human tattoo artists worked alongside Kelvari specialists. Dreth armor smiths collaborated with Avix dye masters. The crystalline species showed their etching methods to fascinated crowds. Young beings from species that had never considered body modification watched with wide eyes, curiosity overcoming traditional reluctance. The main ceremony began at sunset. High Counselor Zephyk stood at the center of the plaza. The crystalline being structure had been etched with new patterns since Derek had last seen them. The etchings caught the fading light and created rainbows across the crowd. Zephyk's voice rang out like wind chimes. The High Counselor spoke about fear and understanding, about how the consortium had nearly rejected humanity based on misunderstanding. about how that near mistake had taught them all a valuable lesson. Different was not dangerous. Different was simply different, and differences could enrich all of them if they had the courage to embrace them. Zephyx called Derek forward. The Admiral walked through the crowd to the center platform. Thousands of beings watched him, representing dozens of species. Many bore marks on their bodies. All showed respect in their various ways. Zephyx presented Derek with something unexpected. It was a crystal tablet about the size of a book. Etched into its surface was a detailed history of the past year, from the first medical scan to this moment. But it was written not in one language but in symbols and images from every consortium species. It was meant to be understood universally across all cultures. The High Counselor explained that this tablet would be placed in the consortium's central archive. Future generations would read it and understand how their society had changed, how fear had been transformed into curiosity, how misunderstanding had become the foundation for deeper connection. Derek accepted the tablet with shaking hands. He thanked Zephyx and the entire council, but he said the real heroes were the young beings who had the courage to try something new, the artists who had learned new techniques, the families who had accepted their children's choices even when those choices seemed strange or frightening. The crowd erupted in sounds of approval. Each species expressed joy in their own way, creating a symphony of celebration that was uniquely consortium. Later that evening, Derek found himself in the cultural center with his crew. They sat together surrounded by examples of the movement they had sparked. Marcus Bell was there, his hybrid tattoo now fully healed and looking beautiful. Cyrix was showing new students how to work with different skin types. Zira sat with other young Kelvari, their marks glowing softly as they discussed their meanings and stories. Paul raised a glass of something that was definitely not from Earth. He proposed a toast to accidental revolutions, to misunderstandings that became bridges, to pain that taught lessons, to marks that carried meaning. Everyone drank, humans and aliens together. Gregory spoke up. The old botanist's voice was soft but carried through the room. He said he had lived almost 80 years. He had seen humanity reach the stars. He had seen first contact with aliens. But this, watching young beings from a dozen species proudly bearing marks that told their personal stories, this was the most beautiful thing he had witnessed in his long life. Nicole asked Gregory if he planned to get any new tattoos to commemorate this experience. Gregory smiled and rolled up his sleeve. There, next to his old anchor, was a new mark. It was small and simple,